At 2:14 a.m. on April 16th, a Ukrainian long-range strike drone was already 90 minutes into a 705-kilometer flight over the Black Sea, cruising at 300 kilometers per hour at an altitude of roughly 50 meters above the water. Its target was Tuapse, Russia's only Black Sea refinery, a 240,000-barrel-per-day complex with a terminal that handled over 10 million tons of petroleum product per year. That terminal was the bottleneck. Without it, the refinery could produce all the fuel it wanted and have nowhere to send it. The loading cranes were running. Tankers sat moored along the jetty, fuel lines pressurized, scheduled to sail before dawn. The night shift was halfway through its rotation, the security perimeter quiet, the guard post facing a calm sea. The nearest front line was over 600 kilometers away. Nothing in their operating picture suggested this was the night the plant would shut down for good. The Port Authority had no idea that in approximately 47 minutes, the first of 4 strikes would begin a 16-day campaign that would dismantle the entire operation and not let it restart. They call it critical infrastructure protection. That spring, it became a countdown. The drone was not alone. Reuters would later describe Ukrainian long-range strike missions involving 20 to 30 drones per wave, a mix of strike platforms and cheap decoys designed to saturate any defense network within range. The likely airframe for this kind of mission was the AN-196 Liutyi class, a one-way attack drone with a range exceeding 1,000 kilometers, a 3-blade propeller driven by a gasoline engine, a 50 to 75 kilogram warhead, and an advanced navigation suite built specifically to survive electronic warfare. It didn't need a satellite anymore. Its onboard terrain matching system and anti-jam antennas made GPS a luxury, not a requirement. Even if every satellite in the constellation went dark, the Liutyi would keep flying, matching the terrain beneath it to a stored elevation map, correcting its heading every few hundred meters with no external signal at all. That was the first problem for whoever was on air defense duty in Krasnodar Krai that morning. The second problem was geometry. Tuapse sits on the coast, and the drones came from the sea. A low-altitude approach over open water means radar has to contend with sea-clutter, electromagnetic noise generated by wave crests and surface chop that fills the lower detection bands with false returns. For a target flying at 50 meters, the clutter is nearly as strong as the target itself. A Podlet K1KE low-altitude radar, the most plausible cueing system for a coastal site like this, operates between 2 and 200 kilometers in standard mode with a radial velocity filter cutting off below 50 kilometers per hour. The Liutyi class at 300 kilometers per hour was well above that threshold. The filter would pass it through. On paper, the radar should have seen it. But the drone was flying at roughly 50 meters, and at that altitude, the radar horizon, the physical limit of how far a ground-based radar can see a low target over the curvature of the Earth, cuts detection range to approximately 35 kilometers, maybe less over choppy water. The spring Black Sea can produce swells of 1 to 2 meters, each crest a radar reflector, each trough a shadow. Against that background, a composite airframe with a radar cross-section smaller than a seagull doesn't stand out. At that altitude, the drone's propeller buzz was swallowed by the sound of the sea itself. Nothing on the coast would hear it until it was already overhead. 35 kilometers at 300 kilometers per hour. That gave the air defense network 7 minutes from first detection to impact. 7 minutes sounds like time. It isn't. A Pantsir S-1, the most plausible short-range point defense system for a fixed industrial complex, has a missile envelope of 1.2 to 20 kilometers and a reaction time of about 5 to 6 seconds. It can engage up to 4 targets simultaneously with 12 ready-to-fire missiles. On paper, the Pantsir had what it needed: range, reaction time, fire rate. This should have been straightforward. But the Pantsir has a problem: a 1.2 kilometer dead zone. Its missiles need that minimum distance to arm and acquire. Once a target crosses inside 1.2 kilometers, the missile option collapses. The system switches to its twin autocannons, 5,000 rounds per minute per barrel, effective out to 4,000 meters, maximum elevation 45 degrees. The drones were programmed for a steep terminal dive. From 20 kilometers, the outer edge of the Pantsir's missile envelope, to the 1.2 kilometer dead zone, a Liutyi-class drone at 300 kilometers per hour covers the distance in approximately 3 minutes and 46 seconds. In that window, the Pantsir crew must detect, classify, prioritize, lock, and fire against multiple incoming targets. Some of those targets are decoys. The decoys are designed to look identical on radar, cheap corner reflectors and transponders that amplify their radar return to match the signature of a full-sized drone. The crew doesn't know which blip carries 50 kilograms of explosive and which one carries nothing. Every engagement decision is a coin flip with a missile attached. The duty crew began engaging. Someone on the fire control console called the track number and bearing. Multiple contacts inbound from the southwest. Altitude below 100, speed 300. The system locked. Intelligence from the wreckage pattern and Reuters reporting suggests they focused on the closest threat first. Standard doctrine. The problem was that the closest threat was a decoy. A $200 radar reflector pulling a missile that costs more than the truck it launched from. Every missile spent on a decoy was a missile not aimed at the real strike drone 3 kilometers behind it. By the time the crew corrected, the lead striker had already punched inside the 1.2 kilometer dead zone. The missile option was gone. The guns elevated, but the drone was in its terminal dive at an angle steeper than 45 degrees. The autocannons couldn't reach it. And then it got worse. If a Tor M2 battery was also on station, and for an asset this valuable, it should have been, it had its own problems. The Tor's engagement envelope tops out at about 16 kilometers, with a detection radar range of roughly 25 kilometers and a reaction time of 5 to 10 seconds. It can engage 4 targets simultaneously with 8 ready missiles on vertical launch rails. On paper, the Tor had what it needed: 4 targets, 8 missiles, fast reaction. This should have been enough. But the Tor also has a minimum engagement range, approximately 1.5 kilometers. From 16 kilometers to 1.5 kilometers at 300 kilometers per hour, the engagement window is 2 minutes and 54 seconds. Against a single drone, that's a reasonable window. Against a wave of strike drones mixed with decoys, all arriving within seconds of each other, the fire control channels saturate. The Tor can track dozens, but shoot only 4 at once. Pick the wrong 4, and the real striker gets through. And the Tor's radar, powerful as it is, cannot tell a decoy from a warhead at 10 kilometers. The identification problem and the saturation problem are the same problem. By the time the system had sorted real from fake, the engagement window was already closing. Somewhere in that 7-minute window, Pole-21 GNSS jamming may have been active. Pole-21 can deny GPS, Galileo, GLONASS, and Beidou across a 25 to 75 kilometer radius. Against a navigation-dependent weapon, that would be a death sentence. The drone loses its fix, drifts, misses. But the Liutyi class doesn't depend on satellites for terminal guidance. Reuters specifically described these drones using visual map matching and anti-jam antennas. The jammer was broadcasting across every constellation frequency it could reach. The drone didn't care. It wasn't listening. At approximately 2:58 a.m., the first warhead hit the port infrastructure at the Tuapse terminal complex. The 50 to 75 kilogram shaped charge detonated against a loading structure adjacent to the tank farm. The concussion rolled across the water. The blast didn't need to destroy everything. It needed to destroy the connection between the refinery and the ships, the loading arms, the transfer piping, the control systems that moved product from storage to tanker. That was enough. Within hours, fire was burning across the terminal. The glow was visible from the coastal road, a dull orange column that turned the low clouds the color of rust. Reuters would later report that the refinery halted operations entirely, not because the distillation units were destroyed, but because the damaged port infrastructure made it physically impossible to ship product. A 240,000 barrel per day refinery became a sealed container with no outlet. The tankers that had been waiting to load had nothing to connect to. The fuel sat in the tanks with nowhere to go. And then they came back. On April 20th, 4 days later, a second wave hit the same complex. The fires from the first strike had only just been extinguished. Reuters reported the second attack struck hours after the flames were finally controlled. This time, at least one person was killed. The port and terminal were hit again. Whatever emergency repairs had begun were set back to zero. The maintenance crews who had spent 4 days fighting fires were now back at the starting line. Every crane, every pipe joint, every control valve that had been patched in those 96 hours was burning again. On April 23rd, after 4 days of continuous firefighting involving hundreds of emergency personnel and dozens of vehicles, the blaze from the second strike was brought under control. Repair teams began surveying the damage. The port crane on berth 3 was warped beyond use. 2 loading arms were severed. The control room for the transfer pipeline had lost its electrical panel. Every repair required parts that had to be shipped in, and the port they would normally arrive through was the port that was on fire. 5 days later, on April 28th, a third wave arrived, another major fire. Reuters reported at least 3 people killed across the campaign to that point. Residents near the refinery were evacuated, the first civilian displacement caused by drone strikes this deep inside Russian territory in the 2026 campaign. And for the first time, local citizens publicly asked the question that the entire causal chain had been building toward. Why hadn't air defenses been reinforced after the second strike? After the third? Someone in Krasnodar Krai called for answers over local channels. The system had no answer. The refinery was still offline. The terminal was still burning. The drones kept coming. On May 1st, the fourth wave struck. AP confirmed hits on the seaport and refinery again. No casualties were reported by Russian officials this time, but the damage was cumulative and the environmental situation was deteriorating. Black smoke hung over the coastline for the second consecutive week. Oil slicks contaminated the beach. Reuters reported that more than 13,300 cubic meters of fuel oil and contaminated soil had already been excavated, and the excavation wasn't finished. Emergency crews were still working the site when the fourth wave arrived. A damage assessment team had just filed its preliminary report. The report was already obsolete. The campaign didn't succeed because Russian air defenses were absent. They may well have been present. Pantsir, Tor, Podlet radar, Pole-21 jamming, all the systems designed to protect exactly this kind of high-value fixed target. The campaign succeeded because the attackers understood the math. 35 kilometers of radar horizon means 7 minutes of warning. 7 minutes against a saturated wave of strike drones and decoys means every fire control decision is a gamble. A 1.2 kilometer dead zone on the Pantsir means any drone that survives to inside a kilometer has a free path. A GNSS jammer means nothing against a drone that doesn't use GPS. And the repeat strike tempo, 4 waves in 16 days, exploited the one variable no air defense system can defeat: time. Every repair crew working the site was a crew not reinforcing the perimeter. Every fire engine on the tank farm was a vehicle blocking an access road. Every emergency response was a distraction that made the next strike easier. Tuapse Refinery didn't go offline because one drone got lucky. It went offline because 4 waves of drones, arriving at calculated intervals, each exploiting the same sub-7-minute window, systematically dismantled the connection between a 240,000 barrel per day refinery and the sea it needed to reach. On one side, long-range drones launched from roads in the Odessa region, each carrying a warhead worth less than an economy car. On the other, Russia's only Black Sea refinery, a terminal handling 10 million tons per year, a coastline now black with oil, and a population asking why nothing stopped it. Somewhere along the Russian Black Sea coast, there are other terminals, other refineries, other loading arms still moving product to tankers, under the assumption that what happened at Tuapse was an exception. The drones that hit Tuapse were already being replaced before the fires went out.